Hey guys, welcome to another episode of the Arise podcast. I am super excited for today's guest. It's someone that I've personally have watched through YouTube. I've listened to his podcast on Spotify. An OCD anxiety specialist. He leads an amazing movement called Restored Minds, which is also the name of his YouTube channel. And he is the author of two books, The AAA Response and From Stuck to Unstuck. So I present to you guys Matt Codde. And Matt, thank you so much for being here today.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And just so you guys know, I only have the one book right now. It's just From Stuck to Unstuck, and it's about the AAA response. So kind of merging those two together. But yeah, with I'm really excited to be here, and no, thanks for having me today.
Yeah. And before we get into anything, Matt, I just want to thank you for the work that you've done because I've been at low points in my life and I've referred to your channel and it's helped. I know it's not a replacement for therapy, but just the insights that you give are very helpful. So I do want to thank you for the meaningful work that you're doing.
Thank you, dude. I appreciate that. Yeah, very much. Very grateful for that. No, I'm happy to. I enjoy getting to do what I do. I mean, that's one of the things that I feel very grateful in life to do work I really believe in, to put out things that I authentically want to share. And my hope is that it impacts and finds the right people. To whatever degree it's supposed to. And yeah, obviously, I think we've all had our low points, dude. And I think anyone that is saying they've never had them or never dealt with stuff is just either pretty disconnected with themselves or just not really being honest, right? We feel a lot of pressure to, like, that there's like shame or weakness, or that we should feel bad about having these times in our life. But oftentimes, in my view, they can produce a lot of growth and fruit if we really can see them for in a higher view. You know what I mean?
For sure. And I know that you've been on YouTube for a while, but what kind of got you into this profession and this field of work? Was it any personal experiences that kind of inspired you to help others? What kind of got you into the mental health field?
Yeah, so I mean, I had my own experience. I'm definitely an experience based person. So like even now, I actually my practice is actually across the board now coaching versus being a therapist. So I still have a license in California and stuff, but I moved to a coaching practice so that I could work with people in other states and other countries and all of that stuff. So to give you like kind of a little bit on the story now, when I was about 18, 19, my life just kind of like spiraled, right? It was just started with a bunch of intrusive thoughts, panic attacks, right? And I was doing all these compulsions. I didn't know they were compulsions at the time. I was just doing things to try to like kind of ease the pressure emotionally, right? That lasted for, approximately 2 to 3 years. Right before I ever like learned what I was actually dealing with, right? It was just kind of this survival period. And don't get me wrong, it wasn't like I wasn't trying to help myself during that time. It was more just like I would go to I think I went to like 5 different therapists to try to talk to them, but just no one ever seemed to really understand what I was experiencing. Like, they just didn't. Every time I would talk to someone, I would be like, "This person doesn't like," even if they're saying things that are right, they don't really get what I'm trying to share. So it was like I had a hard time being able to communicate like what I was dealing with, because the person didn't had never experienced it. So they would talk about it like logically, and I would think that like kind of talking about the fears logically, or, it would seem like I'm quote doing therapy, right? Like that was the idea. Like, oh, I'm going to therapy. I'm talking about this. So I should be getting better, but I wasn't. It just like, and what I found out is that over time was that I was getting reassurance. You know what I mean? And I was going to these sessions, I was getting reassurance, so I would feel better like after the session, but then it was like, oh, the next intrusive thought popped up on the drive home, and it's like spiraling out for the next, next 3, 4, 5 days, whatever, until I can get into another session. And this is where, at some point on my journey, I mean, I had some really low spots for sure. The depression sets in when you're in a really stressed out, like anxious state. That's very common. you know, you're not eating, your libido's, you don't have any, you don't want to socialize with people, you want to isolate, right? I mean, like, as it kind of spirals down, it gets pretty dark.
Yeah.
But at a certain point, I was like, look, I'm not, like, this is not going to be my reality. So I don't care what I need to figure out, don't care how long it takes, don't care who I need to talk to, whatever it is like, I'm not allowing myself to have this reality. I'm not going to live like this. I'm not coping. I'm not managing. Like, I am going to recover. I know there are higher states possible because I've experienced them, and I'm going to figure out whatever it is I need to figure out and how to get there. Right. And that was kind of like, so I had a very like tenacious attitude, I think, that I brought in that I've come to learn is not everyone's attitude. I just kind of assume it's there, and sometimes, but
Yeah.
like I'm not like settling was not acceptable, right? And so as I finally, it was a church volunteer, this woman, and I wrote about her in my book. Basically, like, one of my fears that I had for a certain period of time was like, what if I got possessed, or what if I went to hell, or they were kind of scrupulous based. And
Same
so
here.
and I didn't know it was OCD. So like as a compulsion, I used to go, oh, go ahead. One of the things that I did as a compulsion was I would go to church a lot. Right. And so one day I go to the church and they offered to like have people pray over you. And I was just like not in a good spot. And I'm telling the person, about what my fear is and what I want prayed over, all this stuff. And the woman looked at me and she's like, I think you have OCD. Right. That was actually like how I found out that I had OCD, was this person. I mean, it had to, in my viewpoint now, had to have been some type of divine guidance and intervention there. Because had I not ever been told that, like, I just would have kept taking the thoughts at face value, right? And just pursuing whatever the next thing was. So that led to me like finding a support group. And I was in the support group for, probably 2 years, I think. And then eventually kind of got what I could out of that experience, where I wasn't really like, progressing. And then it was just from there, it's just been like was just like every phase. So it started when I was about 18, and, all said and done, probably was a good like 10-year journey for me before I was where I wanted to be. Now, it doesn't mean it takes 10 years to do this. It just means that like I didn't have any crystal clear path to follow. Right. So people would say, oh, well, you need to do ERP. And they would say, oh, here's how you do ERP, writing out narratives. And then they would say, oh, well, you need to practice ACT, or you need to, and so I'm learning these frameworks and trying to integrate them. And I never had like a singular person that was like, hey, here's what you need to do. I was having to kind of learn it in pieces. So I would go to like the OCD conferences and I mean, it was just this long drawn out process where I would kind of ebb and flow. Then I would just refine and refine and refine and refine and refine. Now, what I eventually learned was, and this is going to be probably on the fringe of controversy, but that's okay. It's just like what I believe in. It's my truth. And so
Yeah.
I
Go
share
ahead.
it openly. And if, again, if you or anyone else doesn't agree, it's okay. It's okay. It's just my own beliefs. So I don't believe in OCD and anxiety as like a disease. I don't see it from that model.
You're speaking my language. That's exactly how I've
Well,
always.
because the disease model exists in the Newtonian paradigm, right, of cause and effect, right? So what happens is that when we look at, and I'm not saying I don't believe in disease altogether, but I'm saying when it comes to emotions, and especially fear, like, fear is not a disease. It's a normal human experience, right? So when I look at OCD and anxiety, I think that a lot of us try to take what we perceive as the problem and insert a solution to try to solve that problem to get a result. Now, it makes sense from that plane to try to do that, but it doesn't work. So people will say, hey, I'm having these scrupulosity intrusive thoughts, or I'm having these intrusive sexual thoughts or harmful thoughts, or I'm having these contamination fears, I'm having hit and run, whatever the theme is. And what we got to realize about themes is merely a projection, right? There's no theme that causes fear. So when you look at scrupulosity, it's like these thoughts of what if I go to hell, or this, that, and the other, are not the cause of fear, because if they were, everyone that had that thought would have fear.
Mhm.
Same way as like doorknobs don't cause fear, because if doorknobs cause fear, everyone that touched them would have the fear. The fear exists internally, right?
Yeah.
And what we do is we unconsciously project the fear outside of us onto these topics, onto these themes, and the mind attempts to rationalize the presence of the fear that we carry. Now, So what happens is that when we try to use ERP to get rid of the thoughts, we try to do the exposure and then we analyze and see if the thought's there or, and no matter what anyone tells you, they say not to do this, but you can't help but do this because you're working at the problem from this lens. You're like, oh, I want to do ERP so I don't have the anxiety, so I don't have the thoughts, right? And so we learn about exposures and then we're like, oh, I need to not do compulsions. But you got to ask yourself, you go, okay, well, what is the cause of a compulsion? Most of us think it's the fact that the thought happened or the fact that I feel anxious, but it's really not. It's the fact that I'm resisting those experiences, right?
Yeah. You created like a
Because
battle.
if I have the thought, oh,
Oh no, I create like a battle, like this internal,
yeah,
never ending fight. Yeah.
yeah, right. An internal, like, no, like this
Mhm.
isn't supposed to be here. I'm not supposed to have this thought. I'm not supposed to be feeling this feeling. So that internal resistance is what causes the pressure. And we do the compulsion to just alleviate the pressure. But we never address the thought or the feeling or the resistance. And then therefore, so the pressure builds back up and we do another compulsion and we pressure builds back up and we do another compulsion. So ERP from the Newtonian cause and effect model or paradigm, I should say. The issue is that the person has the thoughts and the feelings, whatever themes they are, from all of the stored emotion that they have internally that they're projecting. And then when they resist it, the resistance is unconscious. So the compulsion is just used as this temporary kind of escape valve, right? Or like relief valve. Now, the compulsions work temporarily, but they make it worse over the long term, hence the loop, right? So the question is like, okay, well, how do we actually heal? Because the idea of ERP is to remove all compulsions. But then the question is, okay, well, what do you do with all the thoughts and feelings and the pressure that's there? Because no one ever explains that. Right. So when I was doing ERP, I'm trying these exposures and I'm like, I'm making some headway, but I'm not really getting better. Right. If we're honest. And I might see a reduction, or even then what happens is you desensitize to a certain external trigger. Right. So you'll do a bunch of ERP and you'll write out those thoughts or you'll touch those doorknobs or you'll drive. And because you never actually confronted the fear, the projection just changes. And now all of a sudden you have a new theme, quote unquote.
Mm,
Right.
yeah.
Does that make sense what I just said?
It's like I could look at different parts of my life where there's one theme that's like, you think it's the end of the world, but let's say
Hmm.
with ERP, you get desensitized to it, and then you're like, oh, I'm good, and then you realize that your brain attaches to something else.
Right. Well, your fear specifically, yes.
Yeah, yeah. But I've
Not your brain, but your fear. Yeah.
your
And well,
fear.
because again, if you go back in your past and just look at a theme that used to quote cause fear, why doesn't it cause fear today?
I don't know.
Oh, and this is
Yeah,
my point, right? It's like, okay, because the model of like these themes are the cause of fear, and we're going to work at it from a theme perspective, and we're only going to do ERP from a theme perspective. What it does is it at best desensitizes to that, but then usually the person just shifts to a different theme, and that's why they make this case that OCD is this chronic condition or anxiety is this chronic condition that you're just going to have the rest of your life, and that was just never like an option to me.
yeah,
You know
me
what I
neither.
mean? It was just not. It's like if someone said that to me, it's just like, oh, okay, that just means this person doesn't actually know how to help me, right? That's all they're really saying,
Yeah,
right? If they just say you need to manage and cope, it's like, okay, well, they clearly can't get me to where I want to go because that's like all they can ever teach me is what they've been able to do themselves, right?
yeah. I could relate to that
So,
because I'm sorry, I had a therapist that not on purpose, but I actually got into a little debate with with her about this exact topic. And the reason is
yeah.
because at the time we were working on a very specific trigger. Like all the
Uh-huh.
exposures were based to that trigger. We wrote fear scripts around it. Everything was like, let's face this fear head on and let's get over it in a way, right?
Yeah.
And for me, I knew that was the path forward, but also there was always this language that like, well, you have this well, just once you get over this, you're still gonna have OCD. And for me, I'm like, kind of make it sound like I'm gonna take a blood test and they're gonna find like OCD cells, and I think
Right.
OCD
Right.
is just like anxiety. I think anyone has the capability to experience it. I mean, that's what I think. What do you think?
Well, I mean, So here's like if I had to expand my thinking on it, can anyone develop it? Can I teach someone to be afraid? Like, I look at what happened during COVID, right? It's like we saw mass fear take over, right?
Yeah.
And all of a sudden everyone's wearing a mask to just walk outside. And there's people that still wear them to this day. There's people that were compulsively buying toilet paper,
Yeah.
right? And just stacking up carts of toilet paper, right? And telling me that it's like a logical thing they're doing to keep themselves alive, right? There's no logic or reason in that at all. It was
No.
just mass fear.
The fear based. Yep.
And the thing is the training happens where if you wear a mask and you don't die, you're training your brain into and keeping the fear loop going that if because I wore a mask, I didn't die. And then now it's just a compulsive loop that just builds. So I mean, I've watched it build in the masses. I mean, that's actually when I put a podcast out, I think in like literally the month after like COVID got started in 2020, where I was like, fear is the pandemic here, right? Because I really saw fear to be the problem, not COVID. Like the fear of it was the issue that was driving everyone to do these things. Now, I'm not saying that, if you wanted to take precaution in your own ways, whatever that was, great. Everyone had to navigate that in their own way and time in that place, right? But I think looking back, I think a lot of people have a lot of regret of behaviors and decisions that they made during the time, at least from people that I speak to, because they were making decisions out of fear. People cut off family members, because people were divided on who got vaccinated, who didn't, right? People left jobs. People got terminated from jobs, right? Because I mean, all sorts of stuff happened. And I think that's like a weird phenomenon on that, where it's like, we just like, no one talks about what happened. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like no one tries to like make amends on things that maybe happened. And it's just kind of like a weird event, that I think everyone just tries to forget. But anyways, everyone was still navigating their fear in that, right? So I see fear as like a spectrum, right? You have general anxiety that maybe you feel like before a date or before a presentation. You have panic attacks, you have social anxiety, you have OCD, you have PTSD with like extreme fears about reliving a traumatic event or the emotion from that. And then you have all the way up in like derealization, depersonalization, right? And if anyone has experienced anxiety, you've kind of tapped into at least two of these things,
Of
right?
course.
It's like when you get really anxious, you don't sleep well. It doesn't mean you have insomnia. It means that you are dealing with anxiety. And then all of a sudden you don't feel like you get anxious about how other people are perceiving you. So it gets projected socially. So it's like, I don't see it as all these different disorders that people have, right? I see fear as a level of consciousness, as a spectrum of that specific field of consciousness, actually. So when I look at how does one heal and transcend and overcome fear as a whole, well, you have to expand your viewpoint on it. You can't look at OCD in this linear, you have OCD, do ERP because this is what someone else said. There's this weird thing in the field of people with, that treat OCD where everyone just kind of says the same thing because someone else said it and they all just assume like it's all right. You know what I mean? Like there's not a lot of like challenging and expanded thinking that I come across where it's kind of like everyone's just like, you do this path. This path of just ERP comes with its own limitation. And also ERP is only effective to the degree in which someone can experience their emotion. Telling someone who's terrified and throwing them in a room that they believe is contaminated is not helpful to that person, right? A lot of people actually have such bad experiences with ERP that they won't try it again because they're told to do things that they don't really need to do. Okay. Now, then you go in on the other plane of acceptance commitment therapy. Well, acceptance is a very high field of energy, right? If you look at like Hawkins, work on his planes of energy and planes of consciousness, and then Frederick Dotson and people like Levinson. So this is definitely something I incorporate into my own practice with people because I just fundamentally believe it's true. And
Yeah.
it's not something that is adopted by the masses. Right. So I think that's where like a huge framework within my own recovery and what I teach people in when I work with them is a consciousness based framework. Right. So understanding consciousness itself and then understanding the levels of like fear, guilt, anger, pride, right? All the way up to acceptance, peace, love, joy, things like that. So when you look at consciousness, and then you start to ask yourself, okay, why does someone have OCD? Well, OCD exists it's way just beyond fear, right? See, OCD in my viewpoint, and this is kind of through all my own work on myself really is where I've learned most of this, right? Because I've studied under some just amazing people. By no means is this like I just came up with this when I was sleeping one day and I just like woke up and this all just
Just
emerged.
fun
It's like,
experience.
no, this is a result of a journey, right? So first, there's the loop that we get stuck in, and you need to break it. ERP can be helpful with that, absolutely, but you need to work at ERP not from an external but an internal standpoint of what do I really do with all the emotional pressure, which is why I think emotional release needs to be a fundamental part of teaching of what you teach someone before you ever talk about introducing a trigger or an exposure. And then what to do with the thought and then how we actually do that from the plane of consciousness. Once we break the loop though, then it's about okay, and the person's state begins to rise and they start to have like higher levels of energy where they're like, oh, like what happens in higher levels of energy is you just see something totally different. The reason that you can look back on a fear that you once thought triggered you is because you're in a different state of consciousness perceiving that. So each state of consciousness is like almost like a pair of glasses that you wear, right? So when you were in fear and you looked at that thing in the past, it looked as if it was the cause and it looked terrifying. But when you shift your state and you look at it, it just looks entirely different. Now, most of us have fears that we can look back in the past and actually like see that. We're like, that doesn't make any sense that I thought that was scary, but in the time, it made perfect sense. In the time, it was real, right? And it's not because it was causing it was because it was your state being projected, right?
Mm.
So then you go in and you go, okay, well, how do you heal what causes someone to be in this chronic state of fear? And then that's when you kind of go into, well, the what's layering underneath the OCD, right? And so these are the things like the core emotional wounds, the beliefs, and the personas that we take on to try to keep ourselves safe. So basically, when you think of any fear, what really is going on is we fear something because we believe will wind up in a state emotionally that we don't believe we can handle, right? Aside from the idea of it killing us, right? When you look at most fears, it's
Or
like
hurt.
if you think about why you fear it, you're going to wind up in an emotional state that you don't believe you can handle. And that corresponds usually to our lower emotional wounds that we carry within our consciousness, right? So the lower emotional wound, right, is like kind of think of it like a pocket that we have. And then we have a belief that we form to protect us from ever feeling that emotion. Because when the emotion was first experienced, we thought it was something that we couldn't handle, right? We were gonna blow up or it was gonna overtake us. So we had to form a protective belief against that emotion. And then what we do is we develop a persona or a mask to make sure that we don't experience that emotion. So if you start to see patterns in people with OCD and anxiety, and what you start to realize is people with OCD and anxiety have very specific personas that they develop from their emotional wounds. So a lot of times people with OCD and anxiety are overly conscientious of others, right? They have this you start to see these patterns, right? They're law-abiding people. They don't break the law, right? Almost ever, right? They are, have a history of daydreaming, right? History of just being in their mind and ruminating. Now, what is daydreaming? It's I don't like how I feel, and so I escape into my mind and think about things that make me feel different. So very avoidant of their own feelings, disconnected from their own feelings. And those personas, we start to live life through them. We think that that's just who we are. So the overly conscientious persona, the issue is that you're oftentimes very aware of other people's feelings and how they feel and all these things externally, but you're oftentimes very disconnected with how you feel internally. So as we bury our emotion unconsciously through suppression and repression, avoidance, staying busy, escapism, spiritual bypassing, whatever, what happens is that emotional tank builds, and eventually as you store an emotion, it needs to kind of come out eventually. That's why a lot of people will have like an onset of a panic attack right away. And then they'll have this ongoing fear that, and then the intrusive thoughts and, these experiences, like most people, if I talk to them with OCD, can tell me the date that their first intrusive thought started. They can tell me where they were, when they were there, just like it just came out of nowhere. And oftentimes it was not that long after a preceding heavy emotional event in their life,
Like a
right?
trigger, dramatic.
Um, yeah, I mean, yeah, or even just a period of time, right? It could have been. It doesn't even need to be bad. It could be I had a kid,
Mm,
I moved, I changed jobs, I got let go, whatever, right? So when you start to look at healing, it's not just about breaking the loop, but it's about unraveling all that other stuff down there, right? Because what healing is about returning to our essence as consciousness, as, connection, if you
yeah,
will, with our creator. And that's what real returning to essence is. See, one of the things that fear does is it distorts that whole process and gets us to think, well, if we project, so most people with scrupulosity, what we have to understand is God is not the cause of fear, right? It's like God doesn't cause us to be afraid, right? I mean,
no,
even then, I'm spacing on the verse right now, but like, talk about the fruit of the spirit, right? It's like peace, love, joy, right? You know what I mean? It's like I didn't give you a spirit of fear, right? It's
that's
straight
a
up
book of
First
Timothy.
Timothy, right?
Yeah,
Yeah. 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 First Timothy. So it's like I had this realization with scrupulosity where I was like, okay, if God didn't give me the spirit of fear and I'm living in fear all the time, it must be something up with me. I must be looking at this wrong. You know what I mean? So what we do is we project our fear onto God and think God causes our fear, and then we do all these religious behaviors to try to quell our own fear, convincing ourselves that it's about God. That's the trap of scrupulosity, right? It has nothing to do with God causing you fear. It's you're taking your own fear and projecting it onto God.
that's good.
So so what healing is about letting go of the projection, right? And then breaking the loop. And then once you truly learn how to break the loop by confronting and releasing a lot of the built up emotional energy in your body and your consciousness and your nervous system, the unwinding of that allows you to move into different planes, which then make it accessible for you to go in and do the deeper work of the personas, the beliefs, and the core emotional wounds that we often fear. Like if you think of intrusive thoughts, almost every intrusive thought leads to you getting abandoned by society, right? Like think of all the different themes of intrusive thoughts. It leads to you being outcasted, ostracized, right? And that fear of rejection of others, right? And that's what gets projected out into that intrusive thought, right? And this is why learning, and this is where like, and it was my own kind of just incessant, you know, uh, not settling that I just kept, going, right? It's like, what's that, until I was just like, really feeling in a place where it's like, oh, like my state that I feel peaceful. I feel trusting. I move into the world, into my day, into what I do in a trusting sense. I'm not saying that I don't have pockets of fear that come up or anger or any other emotion for that matter, because I'm human. And this
Yeah,
is what Jung talked about with integration. And I know that was a huge, long answer to your question, but I know it's like there's a lot to unpack there. But I don't know. Was that a helpful answer?
yeah. No, I think it was really helpful. And then what you were saying too, I think that I like the answer you gave because one thing that I've noticed with specifically with OCD therapy with ERP, they don't like to get to the cause or the foundation. Like they kind of hyper focus on the ERP and the behavioral exercises. But I've always felt like it's helpful to understand where things come from because it does give a little bit of context for you to move forward. Of course, the
Well,
behavioral part's important too, but I think both are
yeah.
equally.
I think the overarching context is important for a person to have, but a lot of people will just talk in circles to avoid confronting fear at the same time. And the thing is to be able for you to actually do the stuff that I'm talking about, you have to go through fear. There's not like a workaround. See, most people, the reason they talk so much and they want to go through all these ideas is because they secretly hope that there's a way that I don't have to confront fear, right?
Mm,
And I want to be transparent. Confronting fear is part of the journey. That's part of what allows healing. Confronting fear, though, is not the projection. Confronting fear is learning how to confront fear emotionally within yourself, right? And that is the difference in how I look at ERP, right? So when I talk about ERP in my program, right, it's emotional resistance prevention, right? And so, like, we're wanting to actually confront the resistance towards the emotion itself, not the compulsive response, right? It's really going, it's like, what's clogging the whole loop here? It's all the resistance, right? So it's like we want to learn how to become non resistant to emotion and actually confront it, have the courage to feel it, have the courage to know what to do with the emotion as it comes up, because triggers are just going to happen. In my view, triggers are life giving you the opportunity to heal, which I
Mhm.
know is like someone's going to hear that and like, no thanks, dude. I don't want any part of that. But it's true. I mean, like from where I sit now on my journey, like this whole thing had to happen to help me wake up, from just being in my mind all day. It was not like I wasn't able to function. So so when I see it, I see definitely OCD and the recovery process as a much bigger spiritual process, I think, than just this like biochemical. And even then, I talk about that actually in an episode I did recently, where I talk about how you understand the problem, not how you're talking about, where you want to understand all the nuances of your past, because everyone wants to go and talk through from kindergarten forward, right?
For sure.
Everything that ever happened, you know, to try to figure it out. There's
Yeah.
nothing really to figure out with fear other than fear's here,
Mhm.
right? Now there will be healing layers that come, but each healing layer needs to be done in the right order, which is right why certain tools need to be applied at certain times. A lot of people that try the whole like I just want to go and take some plant and just get rid of all my fear in the desert. It's kind of like I think you're doing a disservice to yourself. I think there's a lot to be had from like really learning to confront and kind of go through the layers of the psyche, right? You have the four like planes that you can kind of see OCD and anxiety from. You can see it as like a genetic, right? Like a genetic plane, right? And so typically speaking, if you just see this as a genetic problem, what people do is they just blame their parents and they say, well, my parents are the problem. That's why I have this, right? They take no ownership, no accountability, right? And oftentimes specifically look at it from like a genes and environment standpoint. It's like all my triggers are the problem. The people that trigger me are a problem. And my parents are the problem because they gave me my genes and they have no responsibility that they take in. If you look at the problem from that lens, you're not going to make a lot of headway. The biochemical model looks at the body as just a physical organism and the chemistry, right? So they, usually try to alter the chemistry, right? Or they see the nervous system and we're going to desensitize it to this external stimulus. The consciousness model goes beyond that. You understand yourself as consciousness that inhabits a body, and you understand the planes of consciousness. And then you understand even beyond that, like the belief model that is held within consciousness, right? That belief, that's where like the biology of belief is such a fascinating book because he talks about beliefs impact on genetic expression. But however, how you understand this conceptually is what allows you to work at it from a certain plane. But every plane, especially like the higher ones, I'm sorry, the like ones further out, come with a very limited scope, right? If you just see this as a genes and environment problem, well, you're only going to work on the environment,
Oh,
right?
yeah. That
If you
one. Yeah.
understand it purely from like a physiological standpoint, you're just gonna look at that. And it's not that you can't incorporate all of these, by the way. It's
Mhm.
just the more integrated your model is, I think the better results you're gonna get.
Yeah, because sometimes you could get so focused on one way, and in life, I mean, if you look at nutrition, if you look at any goal you want, usually it's not just one thing or one way. Usually there's a lot of different ways to kind of approach it.
Yeah.
But I think with fear, would you say, because and that's a big topic on this channel, like I called it a
Yeah.
rise because fear held me back and it still does to this day. It's something that I'm still actively working through. So with the name, it's about arising over fear, arising into a better version of yourself. Do you
Yeah.
think that the best, like there's a lot of different important things to do with fear, but do you think the most important thing is to face it,
I think facing it, but I think facing it correctly. We
facing
don't
it?
face our projections, right? We need to understand like fear is an energy field. And you're absolutely right. Fear is the greatest limitation that I think that will impose us in our life, right? I mean, like, look, like anything you want in life is on the other side of fear, right? As it was once said, fear is a field, and we all are going to confront it. And I always and fear comes from our own beliefs. We can obviously get impacted by other people's fear, as we saw in COVID and talked about with mass consciousness. We can allow other people's emotions to determine our own, like, so it's not this singular thing, right? It's a literal like field. And when you're in fear, you aren't really in control. Fear is. So transcending fear is in my viewpoint the greatest thing one can do in their life, because by moving into higher planes of consciousness and fear, you open up opportunities that are not available to you in fear. You open up viewpoints that are not available to you in fear. And a lot of people think that it's like, okay, that sounds great for everyone else, but like most people don't really want to like look and say like, where does fear limit me? And
Hmm.
really have that conversation with themselves. Because this isn't like you need some diagnosis to do this, right? It's like fear is something that we all have to work through our own relationship and experience with. And I think that a lot of us like the comfort of our own belief systems. So anything that pushes that threshold oftentimes gets like immediately like, no, I don't want to go there. I don't want to look at that. I think one of the things about OCD and anxiety is that when fear gets big enough in your life, you're forced to confront it. You can't
Yep.
create your little bubble anymore where you
Because
just kind of avoid it.
yeah, I was gonna say because it gets in the way of everything. Like it gets to a point where you can't really hide it anymore. Like it's affecting your relationships, your job. And I've gotten to that point where it's like you said, you have to eventually acknowledge it, and you got to take that courageous step to, start working through that fear.
Yeah, no, and I think that that's why, like, with my whole like vision and what we do with Restored Minds was I want to give people solutions that they can implement, right? That help really transcend fear the right way, which is about getting into a state of non-resistance internally and your relationship with yourself internally, not the external projections. Now, that that is why I'm so passionate, I think, about doing the work I do for the most part. Sure, there are days where, I'm not saying I'm just filled to the brim with passion every day, but it's like, no, I mean, I genuinely believe in what we do, like, and I believe it's like the greatest thing that people can do. I also believe it's the work that everyone will avoid until they're almost forced to do it.
Yep.
Right. It's a rare breed that willingly like just walk off into the edges of fear just for the sake of confronting fear. I think once you learn the value in confronting fear, you start to see that all fear does is create limitation and destruction in your life. And you see the value in confronting it because you start to realize that it's the only thing that's ever prevented you from becoming the best version of yourself. And instead of finding people that think like you to kind of justify staying in these boxes, the best thing you could do is actually find people that challenge you to want you to expand, because that's when you're going to see the most growth, you know? Yeah. So, I mean, you know, it's one of those things that the best thing people can do is begin to expand their thinking, their ways of what they're doing, how they're implementing things, and really the objectives that they have. Like, don't ever let someone set what they think is possible about your progress and your prognosis of where you can go and allow that to become your reality. I think that was like the one thing that I would take away from my journey is like never ever let someone tell you what's possible for you. All they're ever going to tell you is what they believe. And I think the mental health industry as a whole, I think there's some great things that happen. I think there's some amazing therapists. I also think there's plenty of people that are well intended but put incredibly limiting beliefs on people. I think that there is a limit. Like, I think when you come at this from one singular framework, you're blinded with all these other things that could be true that you're just not even willing to look at because it doesn't fit in your paradigm. So the more you can expand, I think the better one is, and also if someone does put a limitation on you, I'd really consider having them on your team,
Yeah.
or not.
Yeah.
Because I just think that I don't think anyone has the right to do that to a person, you know?
No, I
To like literally yeah, yeah. Go ahead.
oh no, I totally agree. I think that even in therapy, you have to realize that the therapist is guiding you. They're guiding you with the information that they know, but at the end of the day, like, you're the one that does the work, you're the one that shows up, you're the one that has to feel the courage to confront these fears. And also, like you said, life is so dynamic that if you only look at things from like because there's definitely what's the word I'm looking for? There's definitely a criteria that's followed in the mental health field, which is helpful. But like you said, it sometimes is very limited. And I think it's better to have a more of a dynamic overall look at things and to keep growing, like not to, let one thing or one idea hold you back.
Absolutely, man. And yeah, with that, like anyone that's guiding you can only take you as far as they've gone, right?
Mm,
Just like anything else in life. So everyone, myself most included on this list, is limited,
yeah.
right? Like everyone that you talk to has their own limitation. And you need to be aware of that with guidance when you're seeking guidance from others of like I said, myself at the top of this list
Yeah.
as far as like how limited I am because I just don't know what I don't know. My job is to always expand so that I can guide as far as I can guide, right? But that comes like just for the sheer sake of being human, that comes with limitation.
Yeah.
So I think that it's so important to if someone says something and it doesn't land right with you and it doesn't feel aligned and it doesn't feel right, especially in your heart, just understand that people are going to tell you their own limiting beliefs and you don't have to accept that if it's not aligned. You know, a and I think that there's this weird thing in the mental health field specifically where because someone's taught something, they just say the same thing. Like when some like, for instance, when someone's like, there's only ERP and that's the only thing you do, it just what they're going to do is find people that think like them often instead of challenging their own expansion, right? And again, I'm not saying that ERP needs to be part of confronting fear. Absolutely.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
I think it's done in a limited way. I think it's done incorrectly in a lot of context. This is my own views, right? Feel free to disagree with them. But it's a thing where like I just talk to so many people where, I think the guidance they are given is very limited from a lot of people that have never done it themselves. And it's kind of like, so they develop a lot of beliefs that are just kind of self-perpetuated in the community. Like I don't believe OCD is a chronic condition. I
Yeah.
don't have OCD, right? Like I know who I was. I know what it was like back then. I really do. I remember very clearly. I am a different person.
You feel
And
like
and like
here.
I
You feel like
the
you
what?
experience as opposed to I have it. You feel like you've like, just experienced it, right? Like it was an experience that you went through.
Or you
Kind of
can
like
say it in even a path. Like I definitely had that at some point if it was a thing to have. I was in that loop. I was in that state of consciousness. I was there,
yeah,
but I'm not anymore, right? And so, and this is where it's like that's why I think the language we use in pathologizing fear is so dangerous. Because it's like, well, fear is a state of consciousness. And yeah, if you keep doing things that are going to perpetuate it, you can be stuck in it your whole life. You can be stuck in anger your whole life about an event if you don't learn to forgive. You can be stuck in guilt if you don't learn to forgive yourself. You can be stuck in pride. You can be stuck in depression, right? And I mean, part of that is what you're doing with that, right? So the idea of being stuck in fear and labeling it as a chronic condition is a silly idea in my mind. It's just not
yeah.
something I believe in. But yeah, no, I mean, that's kind of general gist of my beliefs anyway.
No, no, I definitely agree with it. And just so we wrap up here, I wanna ask two questions for that
Sure.
because I know people out there. I mean, I can relate to it. I'm sure there's other people. What would you say is the first step for someone to step out of that, like just years of fear, maybe dealing with OCD specifically, but definitely fear of some kind that's holding them back, that's just making their life miserable, and they know that they have more to live and to give. What would you say is the first couple steps? You don't have to go too much into detail. And then if you could follow up with, what does recovery actually look like, man? Like, what does it actually look like and feel like? You know?
Yeah, no, it's good, man. So I think I mean, well, let's go. So first steps are to really understand the plane of consciousness and not look at this from a linear perspective, right? I think consciousness, if you aren't using that, you're limited just from the paradigm that you're operating in, right? You're always going to look at it in a problem solution orientation. And, again, Einstein famously said, right, a problem can't be solved from the same consciousness that plane that created it.
Yeah.
Right? You have to shift states of consciousness. And this is where, like, oh, people are going to tell you, oh, it gets woo woo, or it's just like, just because it's outside your norm of thinking and something maybe you haven't heard of yet. Like, if you decide to close yourself off to that idea, that's your own belief right there, creating your own prison, right? The reality is, if you haven't gotten to where you want to go, you need to embrace the idea that I don't know how to do that, right? Like, you have to be humble enough to say, like, okay, well, I haven't gotten to where I want to go yet, so I need to open myself up to things that are beyond what I currently think and ways that I'm looking. Because if I keep looking at a problem the same way and I'm getting the same results and they aren't what I want, I need to expand myself. So that's the first thing, is really, I think, admitting to yourself. And I think also, like, not trying to do this yourself. I think the worst thing people do is try to go lone wolf and try to, like, well, I'll just figure it all out myself. Like, at no point was I ever doing anything by myself. I was always learning from someone. I was always receiving guidance from someone. You know what I mean? Like, it's because it's like, if I knew the way, I wouldn't be here. You know what I mean? Like
You would
that's kind of the idea. Like, if I really knew how to help myself, it was like I wouldn't have been, I wouldn't have been stuck. Right?
you would have figured it out.
Yeah, right. And that's another thing. It's like, so part of like recovery is letting go of pride, letting and like being humble enough to ask for support, having the courage to invest in it, you know, and to know you're worth it, right? Because all the inner narratives there, I think, really pigeonhole a lot of people, right? Uh, what is recovery? Recovery is not this mythological unicorn destination that you reach one day and then you have no more problems and emotions and thoughts anymore, right? I think that's an important thing to understand, is that's not what recovery is. Recovery, to be honest, I don't even know if I'd use that word, because you just understand that there's just different planes of consciousness. And what I think of now is, you can live in fear, or you can live in trust. Recovery for me is, I'm going to live in these planes of trust, and I'm going to live from this plane in every aspect of my life, though, right? So trust is what I bring into situations naturally, right? When my recovery for me is the pursuit of learning to be as unconditionally loving as humanly possible, right? And that's a pursuit that I'm going to spend the rest of my life doing, because I'm going to have to confront whatever causes me to withhold love from people. Right. And so recovery is a constant work on myself. It's not a destination. It's an everyday decision to always work on myself and to not let fear be a driving force in my life whatsoever. So if it shows up in any way, it's my job to confront it. It's my job to transcend it. That also being anger, grief, guilt, shame, any lower emotion, pride that prevents me from being the best version that I can. And that work is a life's pursuit. So it's not, and then as you do it, it gets easier and easier and actually compounds in an upward way. But yeah, I don't see the interesting thing about the question is, I don't see fear as a disease to begin with, so there's nothing to recover from.
Mm, that's a good way to frame it.
Right.
Yeah, because you can spend your whole life trying to get to this place that doesn't even exist.
Yeah, and it comes from the paradigm that fear is a disease to begin with,
Yeah.
as opposed to a field that can be transcended. And I think that that's what I would say, you know.
And I'm definitely gonna have your channel linked in the bio so everyone can check out all the amazing work you're doing.
Thanks, brother. I appreciate it. Thank you for having me today. It's been really cool to talk.